my name is Dr. Janet Andrews. I received my PhD in 1990 from the University of California at Riverside in biomedical sciences. I went on to do a postdoc at Stanford University, and since then I've worked in various immunology and virology labs. I come here to talk to you today about the current coronavirus pandemic.
Let's start by talking about the history of pathogenic coronaviruses. There's a family of coronaviruses, some of which cause only mild disease, but the most important ones are the three that have been identified in the last 20 years. The first one was the first SARS virus, which was identified in 2002-2003. The second was identified in the Middle East in 2012. And finally, just last year, another SARS pathogenic virus was identified in China. In early 2020, the World Health Organization named the new SARS virus SARS-CoV-2 and the illness COVID-19, and this was based on its genetic similarity to the first SARS virus. To give you an idea of how quickly this virus has spread worldwide, as at the end of June, there are over 10 million cases confirmed worldwide, with 500,000 deaths. Let's talk a bit about the biology of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. It's an RNA virus, and I'm sure you're all familiar with this iconic image of the virus with its crown or corona of spike proteins. That makes it a member of the coronavirus family. As I mentioned before, it's genetically related to the first SARS virus, and it's known to affect the upper and lower respiratory tract. In terms of pathology, we know that the receptor for this virus is the angiotensin-converting enzyme protein known as ACE2. Although this messenger RNA is found for this protein in nearly all cells in the body, scientists are not sure of which cells actually express the protein. They do know this protein is present on lung alveolar epithelial cells and enterocytes of the small intestine, which in large part explains the pathology, the main pathology that we see with COVID-19. What we know now, though, SARS is just not a respiratory virus. It's much more than that. It affects all organ systems, the kidney, the digestive system, and it also affects people's sense of smell, and quite often that is the first indication that you've been infected. It can affect the heart, causing arrhythmias, myocarditis. The virus causes inappropriate clotting, which leads to stroke, even though in those who are asymptomatic. Finally, it can also induce cytokine storm. And what that is an over-response by your immune system to the virus, which actually ends up damaging the body. We see this in influenza also. What we've heard all along with this virus is that people of advanced age are more affected by this virus. And while that's true, what appears to be more of an issue is people of any age with underlying conditions. These guidance came out from the CDC just recently. People who have things like sickle cell disease or who are obese, have significant heart issues, chronic kidney disease, type 2 diabetics, and those with COPD are shown to suffer the more severe effects from COVID-19. There are also some minor risk factors, and if you go to the CDC webpage, you can identify those. Those are also currently being examined, like type 1 diabetes and even pregnancy, to see if those are also causing people to get sicker by this virus. This is an evolving area of science, and the onus is on us to keep ourselves educated. So it's not just a disease that's going to affect the aged population. This is a disease that's going to affect many people across all age groups with underlying health conditions. So how do you know if you're sick? Well, once you're exposed to the virus, there's a 2 to 10 incubation period. Early symptoms tend to be systemic symptoms like a cold or a fever, upset stomach, headache, malaise. This will be followed by dry cough and shortness of breath as the disease progresses in your upper respiratory tract and your lower respiratory tract. Pneumonia will begin to appear at 7 to 10 days. Bear in mind, even those with mild cases of the virus have pneumonia. And this is radiologically confirmed pneumonia. Most of the people who with COVID-19 end up with lymphopenia, and that is a reduction in lymphocytes. Scientists have noted there's a direct correlation between the lymphopenia and the severity and outcome of the infection. An area of big concern is the mortality of this virus. That we know is based now primarily on risk factors, but also on age. And age really comes into play because as you age, you tend to accumulate more risk factors. If we look at the overall risk factors based on the data from the CDC, we're looking, or the overall mortality rate, we're looking at about a 5% mortality rate. But if you look at it based on age group, those are the youngest, the children under 14 and under, have a very low mortality rate, whereas those over 80 have a much higher mortality rate. So it's really more important to look at it by age category, but also look at it by underlying conditions. Again, this is going to be an evolving area of research. We may start looking for mortality rate based on those with type 2 diabetes or things like that. Again, another confounding factor is the large number of asymptomatic cases. There's estimated to be 30 to 50%, even more asymptomatic carriers, and that's going to skew our data in terms of the mortality. So how do you get sick with the virus? The primary mechanism is through respiratory droplets, and that occurs through coughing, sneezing, spitting, anytime saliva is involved. There's also possible aerosolization, and that's of a concern because there's some data suggests that the virus can remain in the air for several hours. You can also pick it up through fomites, and those are things that you touch. Data suggests that the virus can live hours to days depending on the surface. There is a role for asymptomatic carriers. We don't know yet how infectious asymptomatic carriers are. That's a big unknown. We do know that you are infectious 1 to 2 days prior to the appearance of symptoms. So how do we prevent being infected with this virus? There's several ways that we know work effectively. Face coverings, hand washing, social distancing, isolation of those infected, contact tracing, and we're going to talk about some of these in a little more detail. Face coverings are probably one of the main ways you can prevent the spread of this virus. It's believed a simple face covering can reduce virus transmission by 70%. It needs to cover both the mouth and the nose. I've seen people with it pulled down over the nose. That's not going to work. You want to wash your face mask frequently, and you should have several of these. When you take it off, don't touch the outside of the mask. Assume that area is contaminated. When you're outside, if you're out in the open and you're not near anyone, you don't need to wear a face mask. But if you're on a hiking trail or if you're going to pass near people when you're running, you should have a mask on. Inside, definitely wear a mask unless you're in your own home. If for a medical reason you cannot wear a mask, then you should stay home and have someone do your errands for you. Countries that have enacted strict mask mandates are the ones that have stopped the spread of the virus. I'm sure by now all of you are experts at washing hands. Just a quick mention, when you don't have soap and water, you can use hand sanitizer. Wash your hands frequently, especially after shopping. I come home, wash my hands, put the food away, wash my hands again after being out in public. Also, I think it's a good idea after you leave the house to wash your hands. I think we inadvertently touch our face at home, and you don't want to be taking those germs outside of your home. Social distancing is another thing that you've heard a lot about. There's the 6-foot rule that you want to maintain between you and non-family members. It's a good idea to avoid large indoor groups unless you're going to socially distance yourself and have a mask on. Also, instead of doing a 2-week shopping trip, try to do a shorter trip, maybe more frequently every 4 or 5 days. And what this does is it cuts down on your exposure to the grocery store where a lot of people congregate and you're being exposed more frequently. In conclusion, we are constantly being inundated with new information about the virus, and that's okay. I mean, this is an uncharted territory for us. The CDC is constantly being updated with valid information, and it's a good place to check periodically. I operate from the mindset that I'm infected and I don't want to infect others. I find that's the best way to keep myself safe and also protect others. And finally, and most importantly, if you have any symptoms, you need to stay home and get tested and isolate yourself when necessary. Thank you.